Hi, everyone. This is Jackson Steaker, and you're listening to Campfire, a new limited series podcast from Cabin. Campfire is a show that seeks to understand how decentralized organizations achieve wildly ambitious and creative goals. Each week, we're joined by DAO leaders and operators who share the tips, tricks, and tactics that they have used to build community and ship product. Today's guest is Ilona Shevchenko, one of the co-founders of Ukraine DAO. Ukraine DAO is a long-term, decentralized worldwide effort to support Ukraine through Web3 technology and coordination. To date, they've raised over $8 million to help defend Ukraine from the Russian invasion, counter Russian propaganda, and amplify Ukrainian voices. But the DAO's efforts go far beyond just fundraising. They've created really important, crucial coordination mechanisms that have enabled sharing of key resources like bulletproof vests, helmets, and food. The DAO actually even has its own fleet of 30 trucks that provide humanitarian aid from the western border, which Ilona gets into. And they've also aggregated an expansive range of legal resources and online tools for newly minted refugees. This episode is a bit different from the others we've done so far. It's, first of all, significantly longer than normal. I felt it was important to provide space for Ilona to share some of the more intimate human stories that she and others have fought through to complement the more usual tactical side of this podcast. And I walked away from this recording really inspired. I do feel like I just met a national hero. Ilona and the others building with her are brave, passionate, and highly resourceful. And the story of Ukraine DAO is the story of normal people using the tools available to them to help the masses fight back against an oppressor. To hear about their perseverance, and especially to see how cool they were and novel they were able to use Web3 tools, left me really motivated by their resilience and their resolve. I'll be donating to ukrainedao.eth and invite listeners to join me. But to learn more about the holistic effort, you can visit linktr.ee/UkraineDAO, which is also available in the show notes below. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the episode. Ilona Shevchenko, welcome to Campfire. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hello, Jackson. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. For context, we were talking about this a little bit before I hit record, but listeners will know that most of the episodes we've done in the past have been relatively light. We've talked about basketball fans buying an NBA team. We've talked about musicians writing songs, and not that those things are at all insignificant. I'm very excited in both of those projects and everything we've covered here. But I'm really thankful to have you today, Ilona, because this is a really good example of a serious real-world problem that DAOs are helping to address. So once again, just thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get to Russia's invasion, I want to first try to understand the relationship between Ukraine and the world of crypto prior to the start of the war. So in early February, the Ukrainian Deputy Minister for Digital Transformation, Alex Bornyakov, addressed attendees of ETH Denver, which is a big crypto conference for those who aren't aware, about Ukraine's long-term goal of becoming the largest crypto-friendly country in the world. So to the best of your ability, could you describe at least your sense of adoption of crypto technologies in Ukraine around the end of 2021, start of 2022? I know that Ukraine had legitimized Bitcoin as legal tender and ranked fourth on the global crypto adoption index. But can you speak to that pre-war adoption and detail a little bit maybe about what your crypto background was?
So as to Ukraine, I think a lot of it can be attributed to the wider context of Ukraine being global. It's a global IT hub, right? So lots of my friends who live in Ukraine, I would say most of them work in the IT sector. The Ukrainians are just very digitally savvy, and a lot of things, I've realized that a lot of things that we take for granted in Ukraine, they show people who are less familiar with our kind of everyday life. And so, for example, the other day, I saw people on Twitter looking at this Telegram bot, and we use Telegram bots a lot, and our government has developed, partially in response to the invasion, lots of useful Telegram bots. And one of them is called Enemy in English. And using this bot, you can report the location of enemy troops, of Russian troops and equipment. And so since it launched, over 200 80,000 Ukrainians have used this bot, which is like, it's a crazy number, right? But when I saw it on Twitter, I couldn't really understand like what surprised people, because to us, we take it for granted. And I've heard funny stories about Ukrainian refugees coming to Germany or France and seeing like paper documents and realizing that they need like some kind of piece of paper. We have our passports, and I think we were the first country actually who implemented digital passports. My driving license is in the app on my phone, so I don't actually need to have a physical driving license. Any like property that you own, it's also in this one app. It's called Dia. And so a lot of it can be attributed to Ukrainians just being super comfortable with technology. Also, having a government, since Zelensky became president, his team is super crypto friendly. Our government in general is super crypto friendly. And so we are very creative about how we use and apply technology. And so I think that helped a lot. And apart from the government infrastructure being supportive of that, lots of Ukrainian charities, they accept crypto. So by the time invasion started on the 24th, even like my first messages in this group chat that I set up from which Ukraine DAO started, it says, "Hey sirs, Matt and I have been chatting about this quote unquote situation that's happening in Ukraine, and I'm starting to seriously consider launching Ukraine DAO." This is 21st of February, and Ukraine DAO will I'm starting to seriously consider launching Ukraine DAO, which was suggested to me many times before. And it would basically raise funds and donate to trusted Ukrainian volunteer networks who have been accepting crypto for years. And so the key word here is for years, right? Come Back Alive, another Ukrainian NGOs and charities, they've been accepting crypto donations for a very long time. And that helped us very much to be able to distribute the funds that we raised in the first days of the invasion, because the infrastructure for the donation was already in place. And then in terms of my own journey with crypto, I was first introduced to it in 2013 by my friends. And I just said to them, because they kept telling me, you should buy some Bitcoin, it's going to be a huge thing. And I was like, what do you guys know, but I was always very curious about it, but I just didn't know how do you approach it. There was such a huge learning curve, and there wasn't that much resources back in the day about all this. Like right now you have so many like links you can explore, articles with, but back in the day it wasn't the case. And so I ended up working in litigation. So an extremely miserable litigation paralegal. I hated my job. I just wasn't fitting in at all. And so at some point in 2020, when the COVID pandemic started, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder. It's not clear what triggers it, especially in my case where I don't have a family history of it at all. And it's a life-threatening condition that is quite devastating. It's very hard. Medical care is very complex. And so you have to stay on top of it all the time. Otherwise, the consequences are quite bad. And when I found out, I feel like it was a kind of a wake-up call for me that I cannot spend my life anymore doing things that I do not like. It was actually, for a lot of people, it becomes like a tragedy in their life. I say to people and they look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm super grateful that it happened, because if that had not happened, I would still be like drifting, going with the flow. And that kind of mediocre life, it horrified me. That was the worst the worst kind of future in my imagination. And I was just so scared of it happening. But it's hard to have the courage to leave the job you don't like, or I don't know, for some people it's like ending a relationship that is not really beneficial to you anymore, but you're so scared and so used to it that you just find comfort in your stable misery. And being diagnosed and realizing that I may not actually wake up in the morning, like every night or whatever time of the day I go to bed, it's not guaranteed that I will wake up. I feel like that really opened my eyes on a lot of things that maybe some people of my age, they don't realize it. So I don't feel like I have my whole life ahead of me, but that's a good thing. That's a really good thing, because that makes you make decisions that need to be made right now, because tomorrow is not promised. So I left my job and my friends were like, so are you getting a new paralegal job? And I said, no. So for some time, I just didn't have a job. And then my friend introduced me to DeFi. So my entry was from the inside of DeFi. So I guess it was a very unconventional way. And I eventually started contributing to DAOs last year. And as a concept, I'm a very curious person. I'm like, everything that I find out about, it's interesting to me. And sometimes I will go down a rabbit hole of some obscure, like, I don't know, neuroscience or something, whatever that is in that moment. And no one hears from me for 2 weeks. And then I come back with my enlightened mind. I'm joking, obviously. But DAOs, they become that for me because it's such I would hear all the time that this is the future of work. And when you hear that, you're like, oh, that's cool. But why is it the future of work? And it makes me wonder, even to this day, what kind of role will DAOs play in the coming years? Because obviously crypto moves so fast, and so many people, even like through our DAO, a lot of people told me, oh, I used to think crypto is a scam, but now that I've seen Ukraine DAO, and to me, so they're like, I've changed my mind. But to me, it's really frustrating because Ukraine DAO is not the only, or is not even, there are so many amazing projects, and it's by no means we are like one of few selected ones that are good. Of course, there is like bad actors, like in any industry, and it's all about, you have this technology, and then it's what do you make from it. Just, you can make a nuclear bomb, or you can make a very environmentally friendly nuclear power plant. And so it's all about what your intentions are as a person. So yesterday on Twitter, for example, someone said, oh, they said basically that it must be so embarrassing for artists who get into NFTs. So now that NFTs are losing value, and I don't know what's happening there because I don't track the NFT market, but there was so much, like, they were so judgmental about it. And it was so funny because the Ukrainian flag NFT, for example, the Ukraine DAO auction, it's made a huge impact on the ground in Ukraine. And to be saying that it shouldn't have existed because of all this over-exaggerated impact, well, the people claim NFTs have, and of course they do have some impact, but it's like saying that we should ride horses because the initial models of the cars were not very eco-friendly. That's not how you do. That goes against everything the human race is about. We improve things. We don't hold back because there is some issues.
I think you're capturing exactly what this podcast is all about. There are so many groups out there pursuing these wildly creative and ambitious goals. And I really appreciate you providing that background, both on your own sort of aha, eureka moment with DAOs, but also how just digitally native Ukraine is. And so given that, I want to skip ahead now a few weeks. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, but I actually want to go to mid-January 1st, where I know that you received a call from a friend. So could you tell us who that friend was and really what the call was about, and what's the chain of events that it started in your personal life that led to the formation of Ukraine DAO?
I guess I would need to kind of go back in the past even more. When the actual invasion started in 2015, and it was at the point when Ukraine was very vulnerable and Russia attacked it at its weakest point. It was a very cowardly, sneaky kind of, the way it was done. It really baffled me, because the question that really bothered me was how can Russians be allowing this? Because almost any Russian person will have a friend in Ukraine, or they will have a family member in Ukraine. It's not some country that's so far away in somewhere on the other side of the planet that you can't relate to it. So it's not like you cannot call us and ask what's going on. And so in order to understand that, I started watching Russian news. And what I saw there really horrified me, because we were portrayed as like Nazis, basically. So they were and they were broadcasting completely fabricated stories on TV. And those stories claimed that Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine are being persecuted, and they specifically were using the word genocide. And they said that there was this fascist government that overthrew the legitimate president we did overthrow the government, but that's because it was moving towards authoritarianism. And in Ukraine, that's not things that you can do in Russia. You cannot do that in Ukraine. We have a very different culture. And so I was horrified by that, all that broadcasting, all the propaganda, because it's, with my limited knowledge of history, it looked to me exactly like how the Nazi German government was portraying Jewish people to Germans before the Holocaust started. And so that really bothered me. And I remember I did a talk in 2015 at my university in Brighton, at Sussex University. And it covered the war in Ukraine in general, but it covered Russian propaganda specifically. And I said in that speech that Russia, and I said something that at the time it sounded ridiculous, but these days when I look at the notes from that speech, it gives me goosebumps, because I said to people that Russia is a fascist state. And back in 2015, it was a ridiculous accusation to make. To me, it made sense. But to people here, it didn't, right? Because they didn't see the same propaganda. It's a lot more subtle here, the way they go about it. I guess people were just laughing at me behind my back, and I was like 19 or 20, and I was like, okay, cool. Like, nothing, I've tried, not much traction, and I just got on with my life. But I still had all that kind of knowledge and understanding that you gain as time goes by. So, for example, when Putin announced like a couple of weeks before the invasion that he was withdrawing troops, my friends here, they would say to me, see, you've been panicking all this time, or the last few weeks. Putin had said he's withdrawing troops. And to me, it was like the worst thing that I could hear, because that's how I knew it was definitely going to happen, because I know that not a single word of truth comes out of a Russian official or Russian president's mouth. And so if Putin says he's withdrawing troops, that means that it's not going to happen. So the opposite is going to happen. And so when my friend messaged me, it wasn't actually a call, it was a message. She sent me a message saying that she has a friend in the Ukrainian intelligence services, and he alerted her because he cared about her a lot. And so he said to her that the likelihood of the invasion was like through the roof. That's exactly the wording that she used. And
Just to clarify, this was
19th of January, yeah. So it was 6 weeks before the invasion or so. She is not the kind of person that's intimidated easily. She lives here. She's Ukrainian as well. And she is very tough. And so she's not the kind of person to be saying this kind of thing for no reason. And so I called my parents. I said to them, I know you're not going to react to it, but I'm just giving you this information. The reason why I knew they wouldn't listen was because part of hybrid warfare that Russia's been waging against Ukraine is that they were like spreading rumors about invasion days like 100 times before. It was like first, I guess the first aim of that was to intimidate us. And the second was to make us desensitize to this message. So that way, when the actual invasion is imminent, we are not going to react. And people didn't react. And so a lot of people in Ukraine, they were a lot less anxious than Ukrainians outside of Ukraine, because they were like, I'm here, nothing is happening, everything is quiet, no reason to worry. Whereas to us here, and to
the audience's sake, what were you asking your parents to do? What were you hoping that they would do when you called them?
I wanted them to, first of all, I wanted my mom to scan the photo albums because I very quickly said goodbye to whatever property we had in Ukraine. I realized very quickly it's not going to matter anymore, but I wanted the photo albums because I knew they were only in the physical form. And so I was like, Mom, please, can you scan the photo albums? And she said, I have so much work. My mom she's just the most gangster person in the world. And so she was like, I've got stuff to do. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I really need those photo albums. And so I managed to convince her to do that, which I'm very happy about. But I also wanted them to move and maybe evacuate my grandparents. And they just, my grandparents, they're elderly, and it would be very hard for them to evacuate. And I also realized that you need to also respect the wishes of people that you are talking about. And so they're still there, so they don't want to move. Yeah, so they didn't listen, they laughed it off. And then a few days later, I sat down and I went to my laptop, and in order to understand what's happening, I opened key news platforms from different countries in whatever languages they spoke. So I opened like a French news website, I opened Ukrainian ones, like BBC, some American stuff, and Russian websites. And after looking at them for an hour, I felt sick, because the reaction from the West that we normally see when there is ongoing already Russian aggression against Ukraine, it was completely different this time. And so normally when Russia does actual like violation of international law, like annexation of Crimea, for example, the West is very chill about it. It's sad, but it's true. So it's become a meme in Ukraine. So at first there is a stage of deep concern. So everyone is deeply concerned, right? So then there is a stage of strong condemnation, also completely meaningless statement, nothing comes out of it. And then they move to like saying that whoever is responsible will be held accountable. It's another, just doesn't really have much essence in that. And so this time they were evacuating diplomats. They were sending some NATO troops to Eastern Europe to protect Eastern European countries and so on. And to me, that was a sign that things were really going in a different direction, and it wasn't like just like scaremongering or something else. And so I had a very difficult time in terms of like my mental health over those few weeks, because it was like the helplessness of trying to tell everyone around you about it, and like being laughed at every day, and people being like really blasé about it and being like, oh, has something happened? Nothing happened. So why are you freaking out? It was horrendous. It was absolute. In a way, that was harder than when the invasion actually started, because then I was at least on the same page with the rest of people.
So given all these signals that you were seeing at the time and this sense of helplessness that you just described feeling, how did you channel that energy? Who are Steve and Matthew? How did you start connecting with them? And what was the early genesis of Ukraine DAO, the weeks leading up to February 21st?
So Steve and Matthew, so I was a core contributor in Free Ross DAO, and Free Ross DAO has freeing Ross Ulbricht from jails. Its main mission. Ross Ulbricht is the creator of the website Silk Road. That was a marketplace on which people could trade pretty much any goods that's like, with the exception of the things that could hurt someone. So, for example, like guns, or I don't know, let's say child porn was not allowed on Silk Road. Everything else, and 80% of it was actually weed for personal use. 80% of traffic on Silk Road was just weed. Ross, he is a very he's an idealist. He's a libertarian, has very idealistic views. He's a very gentle person, and he got done pretty bad for the website. So he got 2 life sentences plus 40 years on top with no parole. And so the only thing he's left with is presidential pardon, which is he's unlikely to get it from the current president. And so in that community, it was pretty much myself, after joining the Discord as a volunteer moderator, helping his family and friends to raise awareness about his case. And so through doing that, we hope to reduce that political price that the future president would need to make in order to give him that pardon. And the reason why it matters to me so much is because people forget in the Web3 community very often that before Silk Road, and everyone can have their own views about what drugs should be and should not be allowed to trade. It's like you ask 100 different people, everyone will give you a bit of a different views on this should be allowed, this is okay, and this is not. It depends. But the bottom line is that a person who's never hurt anyone, and all the people who actually traded drugs on Silk Road, they've been released a very long time ago. So it's not he was doing that and therefore he should be in prison. He's a first-time offender, non-violent offense, and he gets a sentence this harsh, and he's in a maximum security prison. So it's a politically motivated sentence that kind of serves as a threat to other people. This is what's going to happen to you. And it's completely, especially with my background in law, it's a completely unfair and unjustified statement, and he never deserved to be in prison in my view in the first place. But to not give him a chance to see the freedom again, it just completely infuriated me. And so before Silk Road, Bitcoin, it was believed that Bitcoin actually has no use case. And so it doesn't matter whether we like it or not, but that's how crypto started gaining traction, started gaining adoption. And so that is why when I was always very upset by how his case was, about the outcome of it. And so when I saw an opportunity to do something for him, I jumped in there. And so I ended up in this incredible community consisting from his friends mostly. And in those weeks before the invasion, they were incredibly supportive and loving, even when I couldn't work on some days. They would send me one message a day saying, we love you, you are the best, or whatever, even when I wasn't the best. They also helped me a lot to launch Ukraine DAO, and they help me to this day on a daily basis. I don't know how they managed to do it in terms of time, but those are the people that I really relied on, and they just really guided me through some really dark days of my life. And so that's how I met Ross. I haven't met Ross actually. That's how I met Matthew. And he was one of early members in that community, and he was helping as well to organize it. And then I met Steve, I was listening yesterday to some of the old messages he sent to me, and he said that he considers me his oldest daughter, which is very cute. So Steve was he was actually my customer support agent when I was looking for a DAO contributor pay system. It's called Utopia Labs, and Utopia Labs, they're building this amazing ecosystem for DAOs to operate. And so I was speaking to Utopia, and then Steve told me later on, after Ukraine DAO was already set up, he said that we met on this call, and he said, you were so demanding. It was such a nightmare. Because the product was in beta, and I was asking for some crazy features that they were just still in development. I was like, why does this button not? Why is it not working? What's happening? And so Steve and Matthew, they were one of those 3 people in that initial Telegram group chat that I set up, and that later became Ukraine DAO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we at Cabin use Utopia as well, but thank you for beta testing it to make it better for DAOs now.
You're welcome.
So just to start tying the narrative arc together, you met Steve and Matthew through Free Ross DAO and just other DAO work, and the 3 of you form a Telegram. That Telegram then starts to grow, I imagine, at some point. So can you walk through the decision and sort of game plan that you and the others came to in terms of how you approach growing Ukraine DAO in the weeks leading up to the invasion and marketing the existence of Ukraine DAO to the rest of the world?
Sure. So initially on the 21st of February, we just had this group chat, and then I found this Google Doc in which we had some early ideas about how it was going to work, but I don't think they materialized to a large extent. I just set up those social media accounts, and then I just left it because I had so much other things going on that I saw as more important, because I had no idea that Ukraine DAO thing was going to kick off. And on the night of the invasion, my friend messaged me. She's from Kharkiv, and she messaged me saying that they were getting bombed. And I must have been in a state of shock, because I can't remember how I sent messages to that Telegram group chat that was called Ukraine DAO. I said, guys, Ukraine just got invaded and I need help. And that was it, because I was so caught up in speaking to my parents. I had to call them and tell them that what happened. They didn't know yet, because you wouldn't see that on TV immediately. It takes a bit of time for everyone to wake up to make that news content about the invasion. And so first they were like, there is nothing on the news. And I said, of course, it just started a minute ago. And then 10 minutes later, they called me, and we basically had to say goodbye to each other, because we didn't know whether they would have connection in the morning. We didn't know whether they would be alive in the morning. And so they said to me, if you lose contact with us, don't assume we are dead. And that's not the kind of conversation that I would wish upon my worst enemy, if I had one, to have with their parents. It was just horrible. And so I just remember that even the first, hour was just complete fog in my mind. And after that, I remember I got really mad. And I think that was the best thing to happen in the moment, because that anger was what helped me make it through those initial days and weeks, because it was just the kind of fury that my main thought was it's either going to me who dies, and I don't want to sound dramatic, but that's how I thought, and I still think that it's either myself or this regime in Russia, not just Putin himself. Putin is not enough, unfortunately. The whole regime that made it possible, it just has to be destroyed, because otherwise you just freeze this war. You can put it away for a bit, like it happened in 2015. It doesn't solve it. It's going to come back and bite you, and it's going to be even worse. So that's why it's so important to arm Ukraine right now so that we can end this for good. So what was the question? Because I get carried away speaking about Putin.
So the question was about how you ultimately brought Ukraine DAO to the public, which I think, to connect the dots, you created the socials and shared them with the other co-founders. And then what, from my understanding, is you also went to a protest at the Russian embassy in London. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was going to protest every day. So the last few weeks, before the invasion, I was just living by the Russian embassy. Sometimes it felt like it's just my new place where I'm always hanging out. And so on that day, the protest was scheduled for 5 p.m. But then, obviously, when the invasion started, all Ukrainians, they just went there. It was at 10 Downing Street by the Prime Minister's office. And it was funny. I met this girl there that I only knew her from Instagram, but I never met her in person. She is from Donetsk in Ukraine. It's been Russia occupied for a long time. But so she had to flee war already once in her life, and then her parents moved to Kiev, and she was here in Brighton most of the time. And so for her, I can't imagine what it felt like, because it's like you escape that kind of danger once, and then you have to go through this again, and it's even a little worse than whatever happened before. And so I met her there, and after the protest, I said to her, Ola, since you're in London, she called an Uber from Brighton to London to go to the protest. She sent me a screenshot on the morning of the invasion. She sent me a screenshot that just showed the Uber going to London, which is mental. I can't imagine how much that cost, but she was there. And I said to her, since you're here, let's come to mine for an hour. She left 10 days later. I'm not exaggerating. For 10 days, she was at my house, and it was so good to have her with me, because it was like incredible to have someone who can understand what you're going through. I don't know how I would have dealt with her without her. And I also, from the protest, I went live on Ukrainian national TV. All the news channels in Ukraine right now merged into one, and they're just broadcasting one news channel. And after that conversation with the Ukrainian journalist, I saw this message from the guys, and they were like, "Can you jump on this call?" And I go on this call, and there was like 20 people there, like a video call, 20 people there. I don't know any of them apart from a couple of people, and they're talking about some NFT, and I don't know much about NFTs. I'm learning all the time, but I'm not from the NFT crowd.
Sure, same.
And so I just didn't, and I was like, something weird is happening. I was like, guys, I'll talk to you later. I'm like, there is more important things here going on. And then I came home and I opened this Discord that I had set up a few days before that. And there was like, all of a sudden, there was like a few thousand people in that Discord. And there was like 30 channels. There was like some admins that I must have assigned them myself. I just don't remember it. And it was so bizarre, but because I saw that I was self-organized before that, I knew that my life wasn't going to be the same after that, because things changed from you just being a person that no one knew me. I had 300 or 400 followers on Twitter. I'm not a political activist. So I would go to protests for or against causes that I found important, but I've never been associated with a certain political party or like a certain ideology. So I was like an independent free thinker, and I'm not, it was never like, I never considered activism as a huge part of my life up until this point.
So you get back, you open up your laptop, you open up Discord, there's thousands of people in there. I think now is a good time to actually formally talk about Ukraine DAO. And so like from Ukraine DAO's notion, Ukraine DAO is a long-term, decentralized, worldwide effort to support Ukraine by leveraging the power of Web3 technologies. Could you help us understand, I'm looking at your Notion doc right now, but could you help us understand what the main three components of that mission are and how you bucket those?
Yeah. And that's a very good question, because what I encountered, and then I guess that would take us to the question of what is a DAO? That's a very crucial question before we start addressing the mission. Sorry, you want to add something?
No, go ahead. The audience, I think, for their sake, has seen a bunch of different examples of DAOs as like these internet group chats with shared bank accounts, but everyone, I think, has their own nuanced definition. So I think providing yours is totally reasonable.
Yeah. So very often when I see articles about DAOs, it says that it has to be like a smart contract where there is rules are encoded on blockchain. So they're like automatically executed. Well, that's not always the case. DAOs are a lot more broad than that. And I never felt, for example, that our DAO is like any less like credible or any less of a DAO, because things are different for us. Some things you just cannot code for. To me, a DAO is a community with a mission, and it also often has a blockchain-based wallet controlled ideally by a few people, not by one person. The mission of Ukraine DAO is helping Ukrainians and serving their needs. So, for example, the first task that we had before us is helping to stop the war. And so what I saw early in the community is that even people who were not just like random people who dropped into the Discord, they were some of them within the I guess the large internal teams of contributors, and they genuinely couldn't understand, not because they were like evil or whatever or like ignorant. They just were not familiar with Ukraine enough, and they had some views like anti-war views that I understand. Why is Ukraine DAO? And when I say Ukraine DAO, it was like me advising strongly with other Ukrainians in the community to be raising funds for to help the army, to help Ukraine's defenders. And they were asking a question, why? Maybe some of them are not very comfortable about that as well. And so I had to come out and explain to people that if you want to help someone, whatever the cause is, you need to go to that person, or you need to go to the group of people. You need to ask them what kind of help you need. And whoever I spoke from in Ukraine, at that time in particular, if I asked them what kind of initiative should we support, the answer 100% of the times would be, please help our army. Because even though we've been preparing for this war for a long time, our like army guys, they didn't have a lot of stuff that they needed. And so to me, it was like, I guess a lot of times in DAOs, people will back off. If there is some sort of disagreement, people will back off. If someone is arguing with them or someone is presenting like a contrarian view, because there is a certain reputational damage to disagreement, to tension, to conflict of any kind. But I guess what was different in our case is that the potential damage from not bringing that value and not giving that support to Ukraine's defenders, the potential outcomes for Ukrainian people from that, they just completely dwarfed whatever negative reaction we could get from a person in a Discord server or in a Telegram group chat. So it really didn't matter to me if we like disappointed someone with that. We explained so I came out and I wrote up with help of other contributors. I wrote up a huge statement explaining that in Ukraine right now, there is no civilians. And Ukraine operates as a DAO itself right now. So Ukraine has a mission, and that mission is defense of Ukraine, because it's an existential war to us. It's either, as people say, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And so supporting the army, it was not because I'm like a militant person. And if anything, like before this invasion, I was a completely different person in general. Like I was scared of public speaking. This kind of conversation that we are right now having, it would cause me like for 3 days I'd be crying after I spoke to you. And it just gone, because it's such an existential threat that you either heard right now or you will just cease to exist. And so in that moment, you don't worry about someone from Germany or from Norway or from the US disagreeing about how you should be defending yourself. It wasn't one of my concerns. So we made it a priority in the first days, and we want to incorporate in our docs that this DAO is for Ukrainian people. And it's not to make someone feel good about themselves because they donated and they went to the Red Cross, or that we, by the way, hate in Ukraine, which is something that apparently not many people in the West know, but that's another. And so we want to make sure that the community stays loyal to Ukrainians. And if someone just doesn't agree with it, they can go to another community. And so it's important, and that goes to a broader problem of DAOs struggling with leadership and struggling with decision making and struggling with execution. Because if you don't have conviction about why you do certain things, what is the mission and how you're going to achieve it, right? Things get very blurry because there is always that one person who will voice disagreement because they are just like that. We see that a lot with other DAOs, and I'm very happy to say that we don't really have that problem because DAOs, you are either helping Ukrainians because that's what the DAO is for, and whatever Ukrainians say they need, we will give that to them. And for example, right now our focus is in helping Ukraine in the information war. Russia obviously has unleashed the crazy levels of propaganda and fake news and everything in between. And to me, it's very painful to watch it because they keep using this narrative about Russian speakers. Even after all these years, they talk about Nazis that are persecuting Russian speakers in Eastern Ukraine. And I am a Russian speaker from Eastern Ukraine. And I'm shocked by how many people on Twitter tell me every day that I need to be defended by Putin's genocidal regime from my home country, where there's never been a negative remark about me speaking Russian in Ukraine. That's never happened once. And for that country to have the nerve, after they carried out actual genocide back in the last century, there were multiple ones even, to then come back to call us Nazis and to use this artificially created language narrative to carry out another genocide. Whilst they do it, they point fingers at us and say that this is you. It's just infuriating. And so with DAOs, going back to DAOs, a lot of them struggle with being efficient. And that's something that, because I know it, I've seen it many times, we try to address it. My response so once things settled down after the first few weeks, I was like, okay, now I actually need to write up documentation. And that's when I started speaking to Dima Buterin, Vitalik Buterin's dad. Vitalik is, for those who do not know, Vitalik Buterin, he is, in my view, a genius. He is an incredible mind, and he co-founded Ethereum at the age of 19, I think. Vitalik spoke to me on the first or second day of the invasion, and he was super empathetic and showed us support and donated and so on. And then I ended up speaking to Dima, and the first thing he said to me was that you need to write up the documentation. And I was like, whoa, okay. And then now the more I write it, the more I want to write, because the more you dig into we've done so much research in order to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that other DAOs do, because we've achieved something really impressive over a short period of time. But what happens with a lot of DAOs is that once they run out of that initial steam and of that hype, the community just dies out. And I see so much potential in Ukraine DAO, and there's been so much incredible work done in the weeks after all those funds were, most of them have been distributed, that a lot of their work is not related to fundraising at all. And so we've been, among other things, we've helped evacuate, I don't even know how many people, probably hundreds of people who helped evacuate through our connections on the ground. We've helped to deliver bulletproof vests somewhere where they were missing, or helmets somewhere where people didn't know where to buy them, or providing info resources to people who are looking for help, or directing people who want to volunteer to somewhere where they need help. And so that side of our work is actually something that I'm most proud of.
So appreciate all that vision setting you shared. I think it's really important for other DAOs to realize how that alignment you created has been so effective for you executing on your larger vision. The takeaways I see, the three components of that mission are: 1, to help defend Ukraine from the Russian invasion; 2, to counter Russian propaganda and amplify Ukrainian voices; and 3, in the future, to help rebuild Ukraine after the war. And in all of that, I applaud that there are things that you're doing outside of just helping to facilitate fundraising and sending it to the right people. I do want to talk about fundraising and where the money that you've raised from all these different crypto folks has been going and to what purposes. But I also want to touch on some of these pieces you mentioned regarding bulletproof vests and the more tangible outcomes, and ask you why is a DAO the best answer for executing on everything that you've done as opposed to a traditional nonprofit or charity?
With regards to fundraising, we have a page in our Notion that's called, if you go to our link tree, and our link tree is just like /Ukraine DAO. And then you go to the docs page, and there is a multi-sig and treasury page where we set out all the transactions that we've made. And we are also we are finalizing this. I really need to get around to making sure it's 95% ready. I think I even published it somewhere. It's a Dune Analytics dashboard that kind of tracks in real time all the incoming and all the outgoing transactions in the treasury, on the wallet. So there has been a lot of controversy with the International Committee of the Red Cross in Ukraine, and that controversy is completely justified from the Ukrainian side. If you ask those guys where the funds went that have been donated to them, I wish you good luck finding out. Just like you are just never going to find out. And so it breaks my heart seeing how much money people donate to them, not knowing that it's mostly used on them buying Teslas. And on those Teslas, they deliver water in areas of Ukraine that do not need water. There is no shortages of water there. And they've been one of the most troubling things about the Red Cross, and specifically, and other charitable organizations, and that includes bigger organizations like the UN, for example, is that they claim to be, if I'm honest with you, they are corrupt. And there is definitely some sort of corrupt links with Russia, because I just don't see any reasonable explanation to their behavior. And so whenever they are caught on that,
So, Ilona, for folks who might not have as strong of a background on the UN, could you underline what Russia's unique relationship with the UN as it pertains to the Security Council, and maybe why you make that claim about corruption?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because I assume knowledge here. So the UN has been, and that's an organization that's supposed to protect observation of international law and some sort of like order in the world. And the reason it exists is that so countries can solve whatever issues they have through the diplomatic channels, but then also the fact that it's been completely dysfunctional. So we've known that in Ukraine, at least myself, since the invasion started in 2014, the UN has been completely useless, just utterly. There has been no positive impact from having that organization that has a huge budget, is supposed to have a huge impact. It just completely, I think Ukraine DAO does more in a day than the UN does in a year, honestly. And that's not even like bragging. They just sit there in ties and suits, and I don't know what they're doing there. And so something they struggled with in particular was, after all these years of like literally over 8 years of Russian aggression, and when Russia was already, Mariupol was under this siege, and they were just murdering civilians on a mass scale, the UN struggled to call it a war. And so they instructed their employees to not call it. It was forbidden to them to call the war in Ukraine a war. And so one of their top managers, so to say, he made a public statement that the accusation was not true. And so I went on Twitter and I wrote this thread. I'll send you the link to it afterwards, where I was like, okay, they said it's not true. Let's have a look at their recent statements. And I literally found a tweet by them from half an hour before, from when I was posting a thread, that called war in Ukraine. There is a few words that they use. A volatile situation, a conflict. So that choice of words, it creates confusion in the reader's mind. If you don't know what's happening there, you're like, a conflict, like a crisis, it's also often called. And Ukrainians, it's just infuriating, because it can be called an invasion, it can be called non-provoked aggression, it can be called a war. But it's not a crisis, it's not a civil war, it's not a civil unrest, it's not, I said in one of the tweets that a volatile situation is happening in Russian stock markets, okay? What's happening in Ukraine is a war, and it should be called a war. And so I wrote this thread, and I don't know, and I sent it to everyone I knew, like every person that I was friends with received that thread on that day, and I was like, please share it. And I guess it was a combination of that thread. Obviously there must have been more public pressure. And also on that day, the maternity hospital in Mariupol got bombed. And the day after they came out and they finally called it a war for the first time in 8 years. And so that kind of showed to me, and again, I'll never know, even though that tweet went viral, I will never know that it was exactly us. And to me, it doesn't matter, but it also showed that you can apply pressure to big organizations like that. And if the reputational damage they think they will suffer from not saying that, they will say it. But the fact that you need to force them to do that means that they're useless. And so why is it in the early days of DAO, of Ukraine DAO, some people on Twitter were saying about us, are you saying that it's better to donate to an unverified, they called it unverified DAO. I didn't know there was a DAO verification system in place. They said it's better to donate to that ABC article that you referred to about me not sleeping for 4 days. People were like, it's better to donate to them than to the Red Cross. And today, I can tell you with full confidence that it's better to just flush your money down the toilet than donate to that organization, honestly. And the Ukraine DAO is a million times better because it actually takes into account Ukrainian people, which is what it's supposed to do, you know?
One of the things that is uniquely solved by the blockchain applications of Ukraine DAO is that transparency of the flow of the funds that goes in and out of the Ukraine DAO. And so could you speak a little bit to the types of organizations that you have helped to flow funds to? Sure. and what their specific missions are and how they use that money?
We donated 1,550 Ether, so it's about $4 million to Come Back Alive. Come Back Alive is the most transparent, the most trusted organization in Ukraine that's supporting the armed forces of Ukraine. They literally, if you go on Ukrainian Twitter, almost every Ukrainian person will have the link with the donation page in their profile. People love them, and for good reason. They have an extremely stringent approach to. They are run by volunteers. As far as I know, like none of them are paid at all. And they are transparent with their reporting. They launched this like crypto tracker where you can see almost in real time. It's updated every 10 minutes. All the money or the crypto funds coming in and out, and it's even better for fiat with them. They were an obvious choice because that's if you want to support the army, that's who you donate to. And then we also donated about $1 million worth of Ether to Ukraine directly. So to Ukraine posted the crypto addresses, so we were able to just transfer the money to Ukraine. And again, it's the kind of thing that's very hard to criticize, right? If you care about Ukraine, then send something to Ukraine. And then we also made donations to Outright, which supports LGBT people in crisis in Ukraine. They were super happy, and I stay in touch with them up to this day. We always come across each other in some random Twitter spaces. They are always like, I cheer for their successes, they are for our ones. And they published a really cool impact brief report where they exactly explained how the funds that we donated made impact in Ukraine on the ground. And when I saw that brief that they prepared, I even cried because it was like a very special feeling to be able to see what happened after all those efforts in Ukraine. And so after all this, and then we donated to a couple of smaller charities as well. But my point is that after, and Come Back Alive also, they published a couple of times messages of gratitude publicly to us specifically. And so after that, any like criticism from people online, it's taken very lightly by us because it's Come Back Alive's gratitude that matters, or even just like not even gratitude, but being able to help them. And just like when they posted like a thank you post, it was like one of the best days ever in my life because it was just being able to help people who are sacrificing their lives, defending myself, every Ukrainian person, and also, I believe, every person in the rest of the world. It's one of the most meaningful things that you can do. And then also, in terms of why a DAO is better than a charity, have you ever tried asking a charity for support? People dropped into our Discord at all weird times of the day with the craziest requests. Like the requests that are processed with our team, I can guarantee you there is no charity that's gonna do that. A charity works. I have plenty
Do you have
of
an
examples.
example?
Yeah, of course. And I have screenshots. So there are lots of screenshots. If you go to our Discord, there would be someone like, guys, this is my family, and they would attach pictures and stuff. And they would say like, I need, and what they needed, it was always different, but it was for some time, it was often bulletproof vests, helmets, and some medical stuff. I don't know how to call all of them in English, but yeah, I've just forwarded you some. So it's someone comes in and they say, I have a request from my family in Kiev for bulletproof vests. Is this something that the DAO can purchase and get sent? And so they also attach a screenshot with the conversation with their family. And so Steve says to them, because Steve was hanging out more than me, like watching out for people to help. He said that we are focused on donations through like vetted organizations and charities. But our policy has been that whilst the financial donation to highly trusted charities so that we can report back and make sure that the funds are used in the most responsible way, we can always, at least I can always, through all the people that I came to know through this DAO, I can almost always find them help in other way. So if we may not be able to donate to help them financially through the treasury account, but I can ask around with my friends. I can reach out to people in other volunteer networks, and almost always we find help for them. And so this person, and that conversation is still in Discord, so anyone can open it and see. And it was on the 7th of March. And I messaged in the Discord, it's in the public channel, that I've just spoken to your friend. And he says that I'm actually crying a little. And he says, I replied to him saying, least I could do. And he says, the least you could do is thoughts and prayers. And thoughts and prayers is another meme in Ukraine. It means like, good luck to you guys, whatever happens to you. And he says, you guys are actually getting off your ass and providing real support. And so anyone can open that in our Discord and go back in time. And it's real people and it was real lives. And most of them were DMing me instead of messaging in public channels. And to me, that's the being able to link volunteers and people looking for help at any time of the day with whatever requests, however unusual they could be, being able to efficiently sort that out. I would be very surprised if you found me a charity that does it. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
For the audience, you aren't able to see this, but I do want to underscore Elena's last point about the sheer amount of love and gratitude that these folks in the Discord are clearly pouring to her in these screenshots, and it's very admirable. And I want to tie these threads together, Elena. So we're talking about these examples of ways where DAOs are able to change that in ways that charities or nonprofits might not be able to, and it's not always specifically related to fundraising. There are these logistics and coordination mechanisms that DAOs just seem to have a clear advantage on. I want to tie this thread back to your family, who we started talking about at the beginning of the episode. And I know that there's a specific trucking-related application. So could you share how, when we last mentioned your family, there was some sort of level of skepticism that Russia was really going to invade? Can you tie how they then came around to realizing this was legitimate after your call with them, where you weren't able to talk to them, and then how you've been able to involve them and their resources in the fight?
Even when the war started, I was like, okay, maybe now they will agree to evacuate somewhere. And they were like, no. And that's something that you will hear that from most Ukrainians. They will say, we are going to defend. How Zelensky says, I need ammunition. My dad said, I don't need to be evacuated from my hometown. That's what he said to me. And I'm like, you do. But he just wouldn't listen. And he basically, in the beginning of March, Russians occupied, or maybe, no, I think they occupied it in the end of February. The largest nuclear power plant in Europe is in Enerhodar. It's called Zaporizhzhia NPP, but it's actually in Enerhodar. It's this town not far from where I'm from. There was a night when Russians started shelling right at the nuclear plant. I can't even explain to you how dangerous that is. The assessments about how destructive it will be can vary. Obviously, no one wants to find out. But I called people who were in Enerhodar, and I was like, and then there was a fire. And I called them, and at first it was just a fire in the administrative building, but it's 100 meters away from the reactor. And then later on, because the firefighters were not able to get through to the site because of the because Russians wouldn't stop, the fire got to the actual reactor building. And so I called my parents, and I was absolutely hysterical, and I said to them that you need to leave immediately because there is a fire in the reactor. And my dad was, chill out. He's just completely unfazed. And he said, you are helping the enemy with your emotions. And he said something really infuriating to me. He said, go and do something useful. And I'm like, there is not going to be anything more useful right now than trying to talk sense into you. And he just kept repeating this, go and be useful to someone. And over those first few weeks, they would barely speak to me because they knew how busy I was addressing all these requests, that I was just kept, you address one, you have 5 more coming in, because it's like that person went to tell someone, oh, I don't want to help me and your team. And then you have 5 new bulletproof vests or whatever other requests I had. And so they were like, just go and help other people. We'll sort ourselves out. They didn't listen to me. But then in the morning afterwards, they call me and they're like, actually, can you try to relocate us somewhere? And my family's business has been trucking, and it was like commercial goods and transportation. It was, it's like a lot of, the problem was that we had 30 trucks, but because the war started, a lot of truck drivers went to the war. There was almost no one to drive the trucks. It's a very logistics dependent business. They were only, I was like, sure, because I was so eager to get them out of that. I started reaching out to all sorts of friends, connections that I could, and in like 10-15 minutes I could give them like 8 different options about where they could go in Ukraine, in different regions of Ukraine. I'm like, whichever you want to choose. And so they were super impressed by that. And to me, one of the most moving moments about this whole DAO's story was when they went to Western Ukraine, to a place where I don't think I've ever been there. I'm not sure, maybe once or something. They go to this place with 8 trucks, drivers for them, and an accountant. And in that place in Ukraine, they are met by people who are complete strangers. I've never met them. I never spoke to them until they met my parents. And my dad said to me afterwards that they were greeted like royalty. It was very adorable. And so these guys who I don't know, I just get a message from an unknown number in my Telegram. And it's a picture of my dad with 2 dudes like my age. And they're like, hey, we have your dad here and your mom. And they welcomed them. And that was it was like through all of those efforts for other people that we made. Obviously, I didn't anticipate it at the time, but it paid off in a very like most meaningful for me on a negatistic personal level way, because I remember in the first days of the fundraiser, I joined this Twitter Spaces with Steve and someone else from the DAO, and the host of the Twitter Spaces was like, Alona, you helped raise $5 million by that for Ukraine. They were like, how does it make you feel? And I said to them, I just literally do not give a fuck, you know. And I know it sounded, that's not what you need to say. That's the PR disaster, so to say. But at the time, I just didn't care how much money we raised, because I said, guys, there was a recording of the Twitter Spaces. It's one of the best kind of speeches that I ever gave. I said, I don't care how many millions we raise. If I don't get my parents out of there right now, you might as well raise 20. It doesn't matter to me. And a lot of people, they're sometimes negative or skeptical about Ukraine DAO, and they say, you guys are like profiting of people's misfortune. And I just want to, first of all, I just always want to punch those people if I meet them, because it's like, if they knew our level of misfortune that we go through on a daily basis, they would just die of grief, something that we just have to get on with it every day. And so to be saying that kind of thing to a Ukrainian person is just unacceptable in the first place. But anyway, and then my mom, she sent me this picture a couple of days later. It was the 8th of March, so it was International Women's Day. And she was holding like a flower bouquet in her hands that the guys got for her. And to me, it was just so moving that there is this, it just makes me emotional talking about it. This bunch of people that I'd never met, I've not done anything for them directly. I never rescued anyone for them or whatever. They just knew me through someone else. And they are doing all that stuff for my family up to this day. And they're looking after them. They found accommodation for all the drivers, for my parents. They organized their work. And so right now we have 30 Ukraine DAO trucks. We've now managed to get more drivers as things stabilize. And so 8 of those trucks carry humanitarian aid from across the border. and then 22 more are operating in Ukraine, and they are partially funded by Ethereum donation. I set up a separate wallet where people can donate specifically to my parents, separately from the DAO funds. And so my parents, they always ask me, but I'm sure that's not my money. I'm like, I don't have this much, and that's people send it to you, the ones who found out about you from the internet, and they're always so shocked by that. To them, it's like some people from like Texas, like one of the biggest, most loyal supporters. His name is Matt. Matt, hello. If you listen to this podcast, I'll send him this podcast. I'm super grateful to this amazing guy. He just like consistently helps them, and they're always so moved by it. And so I guess that's the best application of DAOs that I've personally heard. And we just came up with it because it just made sense.
We're recording this right before Mother's Day, and so the story about the gentleman getting flowers for your mom, I found touching, and thank you for sharing. So speaking of some of Russia's malicious behavior, the country's famous for its army of hackers, its sophisticated cyber warfare. Have you all as a DAO been subject to any of that manifested, and how have you countered it? And also, are there any good cybersecurity practices that other DAOs should follow?
That's a great question. We have put together an online safety hub in an online safety center in our Notion. It was mostly me putting that together, and also we added some. So the general tips, they apply to everyone. So like any average user would find it helpful, but it's also, there is resources for people who are in the war zone in Ukraine, where there is like very in-depth communications resilience materials. I thought about security very early on because I knew that we would be a target. And so I found an absolutely excellent cybersecurity firm who is taking care of, because as much as I'm a curious person, I can through my research, I can come up with some good recommendations for others. I understood that my security needs would be different from a normal person. The guys who are helping me, they are UK-based cybersecurity firm who is taking care of quite high-profile people. They've just been excellent. And so my friends basically organized very early on physical security and cybersecurity as well. And so when I put together the online safety hub, I had my cybersecurity firm kind of scrutinize it. So I was very proud they didn't find much to edit there. And then also the childhood friend, his name is Dima Ivanov. He runs a project called Power Inside, and they specialize in DAO security. And once we had a call with them, I speak to Dima Ivanov now to almost every other day, and they scrutinized us from the point of view of a hacker, how they would target us. And their feedback was very positive. So something to understand about cybersecurity is that you're never 100% safe. But it's a process, and the way we approach it with my cybersecurity firm is that there is no stigma. So there is no stupid stuff that you can do, or there is no bad practices. It's just areas for improvement. And I'm super grateful to them because I understand that, again, you are never 100% safe, but you can be safer than you could be otherwise. And so they definitely help us have some peace of mind. And also, obviously, our multisig is protected by three out of 5 people need to sign the transaction for it to go through. So myself or Steve or Matthew, we cannot just go and start giving out money.
Can you just real quickly explain what a multisig is for folks who might not understand?
So multisig it means that it's a way to set up a wallet that requires multiple transactions in order for the transaction to be confirmed. So for example, in Ukraine DAO, multisig requires 3 signers out of 5 to sign a transaction, and then it can go through. Otherwise, it's just not going to be confirmed. And so it would need to be myself, Dima, and X-Shells, or Matthew, or have I counted 5? So I'm terrible. I counted 5 people. Myself, Dima, Steve, Matthew, and X-Shells. And that's where the importance of reputation comes in. People know that Dima Buterin is not going to buy himself a Lamborghini with treasury funds. And people know what kind of person I am. And every person in our multisig is a long-standing contributor to this space. We are all docs. No one is anonymous. Like an NFT picture instead of a profile avatar and so on. People know who we are, and we are not we have Ukraine's interests at our hearts. So there is that trust that I hope it will become in the future. I hope it will replace this token, honestly, because it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So there should be a better system to account for that reputation, reputation development. But this kind of capitalized token-based thing where you can just buy it and sell it and so on, it's just not a good idea. For our kind of DAOs, obviously there is other types for commercial ones, then maybe that's better for them, but not for our DAO. That's basically, it's like a charity on steroids.
So I have one last question to take us out, which is, what do people misunderstand about decentralization, especially in the context of everything that you all are doing with Ukraine DAO?
Yeah, that's a very good question too. So I feel like a lot of people misunderstand what decentralization means. And so DAOs stand for decentralized autonomous organization. And everyone just focuses on the first bit. And so a lot of DAOs decentralize not in a very mindful way. And so I think it's important to recognize, and I know there is this human aspiration kind of to do everything, set up everything perfectly from the beginning. I understand that, but building a good organization takes time. So for Ukraine DAO to get where it is, it's days and days of daily grind of multiple people, where at some point I was just like, I thought I was gonna just lie down and die. That's what it took. It's not so magically you just decentralize and things go great. No, you need to put thoughts into how you apply that to your particular mission. And if your decentralization is preventing your DAO or your project, whatever that is, it can be a business, it's preventing you from getting to that mission, then maybe you don't need it. So we are taking it slow and we try to explore different narratives, different frameworks, and lots of value are found in the concept of like building in public. So we started having weekly Twitter spaces where we like come out to the community and we're like, guys, this week we've been doing like, we read this book or we saw these articles, and it's a great way to educate people on DAOs. And we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and some of the problems we'll never solve. We will never find a perfect answer. But we're doing our best, and people can see the logic, the rationale, how our attitudes develop. So 2 weeks ago, I was obsessed with holacracy, self-management, self-direction. Then I'm like, crap. Some people don't want to self-direct, and that's also something that you need to take that into account. Some people want to be told what to do, and it's an uncomfortable thought because we assume that decentralization and self-management is great, but it's not great for everyone. And some people just don't want that. They don't have the time or they don't want to put the effort into thinking what they could contribute. So you need to direct them. You need to push them in the right direction. And right now I'm like, we are adopting some elements of holacracy, but not all of it, because if I applied it to Ukraine DAO tomorrow and I was like, guys, this is our new documentation, first of all, no one's going to read that. No one reads docs. So I tried to write our documentation on the basis of what we actually have. Because if you put something in writing, that doesn't make it true. So I try to make sure that in our documentation, I just describe what's happening. And as it changes, that documentation is going to change. And so a lot of projects are very uncomfortable with changing their mission. So they treat it like the American Constitution, like you just can't touch it. You need to change, like you need to adapt to the change in circumstances. And so I change our documentation every day, something changes in that. And I think it's a good thing, because a DAO, it's a living organism. You treat it as it's like a body, a human body, and it changes every day. And so you just need to make sure that it's reflected in the document so that everyone is kind of on the same page.
It's a great answer. Ilona, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm struck by not just your courage, but by the entire country of Ukraine, and by the entire country of Ukraine. Maya Angelou, who's someone I like to quote a lot, she writes that courage is the most important of all of the virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. And I'm so impressed by how principled the DAO has been, by how you've been able to stand this up amid all of the, I'm sure, personal stress that you're under. Courage is grace under pressure. That's an Ernest Hemingway quote, I think. So huge kudos to you. I want to make sure that the audience has very clear next steps on how to get involved if they would like. Where would you like to direct them?
Of course. So in our link tree, there is literally a button that's called 10 ways to get involved with Ukraine DAO. So you click on the button and it will take you through all the options that you have. And I feel, again, a lot of DAOs should do that because people just join and they don't know what to do. Whereas you open our Linktree and you're like, boom, and you have all the options that you can, all the ways to get engaged with Ukraine DAO. They're just listed there, and it includes every social network that we use, but also like how to apply to be a contributor and so on. And so most of our contributors that are active right now just applied, or I found them on Twitter and stuff like that. So we're not a cliquey organization. So whoever has skill set that is useful to us, and whoever is a good culture fit, because I think that's very important as well, they are welcome, and they all joined, like a lot of them joined recently. Yeah, everyone is welcome. There is also an upcoming events page, so the new Twitter spaces where you can speak to us, they're always there. So you can always like schedule something in and you can join the conversation and talk to us through voice. I think it's also like a very good way to connect with the community.
Great. Well, we'll put the Linktree URL in both the intro to this episode and also in the show notes. So thanks again, Ilona, and appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Take it easy.